And the front-runner to be Germany's next chancellor, Friedrich Merz, says he will try and form the nation's next coalition government before Easter. So what can we expect in the next few weeks? Dr. Ed Turner from the Ascendance Center for Europe is an expert on German politics, and he joins me now from Berlin. Good to talk to you, Ed Turner. Now, before we talk about the results themselves, can we just go to the man who's most likely to be Germany's chancellor? What do we know about Friedrich Merz and his rise to power and where he leans politically?
Well, we've had a long time to get to know him. He's been a fixture of politics since the 1990s, long-standing rival to Angela Merkel, stands for a very different sort of conservatism. He's a social conservative, in the past has been sceptical about gay rights, for example, voted against abortion, and he's a fiscal hawk. He's someone that wants balanced budgets, lower taxes, deregulation, and more generally, he has squarely positioned his party, the Christian Democrats, towards the right, a move away from the sort of Merkelian centre ground.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. How will he differ from Angela Merkel, who was from the Christian Democrats? How much of a difference are we expected to see from the way she did things and the way he may be able to do things if he becomes chancellor?
Well, personality-wise, he's a very different creature, Catholic, Western, and he's tried to cast a different sort of appeal when it comes to migration policy in particular, shifting the stance to the right. That being said, he will need a coalition partner, and the only option there really are the Social Democrats, and they will be trying to bring him towards the centre ground on issues particularly around budgets, investment, taxation. So he may not be able to be as different to Merkel as he would wish.
Yes, and as the pre-election polls were predicting, there would be a surge to the far-right parties, and that was the case, with the AfD winning around 20% of the vote. That is quite a victory for them in some sense. But what are the numbers telling us about why this massive swing took place? Where did they win the votes?
Well, the remarkable thing is, if you look at a map of Germany, then you'll think, I've seen that map before, and you will have done, because it was the map of Germany. The electoral map of Germany now is like the map of Germany in the days of partition. West Germany, broadly speaking, voting for the Christian Democrats in first place across most constituencies, and Eastern Germany voting overwhelmingly for the far-right AfD across its territory. That's partly to do with migration. It's also to do with feelings of economic insecurity. It's also to do with greater opposition to the German military support for Ukraine. In Eastern Germany, there's much more hostility towards that there than there is in the West. And general economic discontent, a feeling that Easterners are second-class citizens. All of those things play a role.
And just to explain to our audience, what are the sort of demographic differences at the moment as it stands between the eastern part of Germany?
Well, there are slightly higher levels of unemployment, slightly lower levels of growth, more, if you like, left behind areas. But it's not just that. I think the differences are more cultural in a sense. People having the older generation having had a different upbringing, lower levels of party membership, for example, for the established parties, less history of democracy, also more societal links with Russia, more skepticism about support for Ukraine. So it's not necessarily just about the economics. It's also about, if you like, more deeper-seated cultural differences.
And also, the numbers are also telling us that the big swing towards AfD was also driven by younger voters. What might you read into that?
Well, that's right. So there's a really stark contrast between younger and older voters. Amongst younger voters, first place went to the Left Party, who were written off just a few weeks ago, pro-migration, against military support for Ukraine, but really against all military involvement of Germany. For left-wing economic policies, higher taxes, redistribution. And they had a really effective campaign amongst younger voters. Amongst older voters, they barely registered, much, much lower. The flip side is amongst older voters, the Christian Democrats, and to a lesser extent, the Social Democrats, the old school established parties, people's parties, we used to call them, they did much, much better, but then really struggled with a younger electorate. So we see divisions between East and West, and we see divisions between young and old.
Yes, and is it fair to say that immigration was probably one of the biggest factors that was front and center for most voters, perhaps alongside the economy?
It certainly was a big issue, and it dominated the campaign, it dominated the TV debate. So I think you're right that the economy was also a huge issue. And, Germany's got not only a sluggish economic growth currently, if growth is detectable at all, but it's also really concerned about the potential imposition of tariffs by President Trump, and that fuels the tremendous insecurity which was already there.
And going to that, I mean, in terms of now the future coalition government that has to be formed one way or the other, you've talked about getting in a coalition possibly with Olaf Scholz's party. Is there any chance that the Greens might be involved in this?
No, there's no chance at all. Until late last night, it wasn't clear whether the numbers would stack up for Christian Democrats and Social Democrats to have a coalition. And in fact, they do. It was a close-run thing because one of the minor parties nearly scraped in, and that would have spoiled it. But as it is, the only viable coalition really is between the Christian Democrats and Social Democrats. They'll need to negotiate. The Social Democrats have been saying, we're not to be had on the cheap. We have our own objectives. But in truth, no one will want to see early elections. And so I think it's very likely that that government will be formed. It may run beyond Easter. You mentioned that was Friedrich Merz's aim. But really, that's the only option for Germany going forward.
Okay, Dr. Ed Turner, really good to get your analysis today. Thank you so much.
Not a problem.